My psychopath ex-boyfriend broke into my house and my dog protected me, but in response, my sister and the police wanted me to put the dog down. My ex-boyfriend was a psychopath who loved using my autism to manipulate me, often sensory overloading me or making me believe I was worthless. When I found the strength to break up with him, he began harassing me. I didn't feel safe and got myself protection in the form of a pit bull I named Max, who went on to save my life. My ex broke into my house in the middle of the night with very evil intentions, but before he could lay a hand on me, my dog attacked him. I called the police and the ambulance, and my ex was sent to the hospital, but the officers told me my dog may need to be put down. I deemed this extremely unfair and complained to the officers, but they said they had no power in this matter. I remember cuddling Max for the rest of the night, crying about what had just happened, as well as the possibility that my dog was going to be taken away from me. In the immediate aftermath of the terrifying home invasion, I couldn't bring myself to leave the house. I did sometimes go outside, but truly only for one thing, and that was to take Max to the vet in order to get some tests done so I could prove he was not rabid and didn't have any diseases. I had no idea what to do with these tests and results I got back from the vet, but I kept them safely tucked away in case I ever needed them as evidence for Max being safe. However, when I wasn't taking him to the vet, I felt like a prisoner in my own home. I didn't step outside. I cuddled with Max constantly, always grateful for his protection and deeply shaken by the whole ordeal. One morning, I was sitting on the couch sipping my morning tea, Max lying at my feet as always. There was a sudden loud knock on the door. My heart jumped into my throat and I was paralyzed with fear. The sound was harmless, but my mind instantly flashed back to the night my ex broke in. Max was on his feet in an instant. His ears perked up. He let out a low growl and positioned himself between me and the door. My hands trembled and I had to take a few deep breaths to calm myself down. I slowly approached the door with Max by my side. I peeked through the peephole and saw the familiar blue uniform of our local mailman. I felt relieved. I opened the door a crack, just enough to greet him and accept the package he was holding out. He told me good morning, and I told him thank you, grabbed the package and closed the door. As the door shut, I let out a sigh of relief. My pulse slowly began to settle, but I knew I wasn't ready to leave the house for anything besides taking Max to the vet yet. Max nuzzled my leg, sensing my stress, and I reached down to scratch behind his ears. "It's okay, Max," I whispered, more to reassure myself than him. "It's just the mailman. We're safe." After weeks of my version of house arrest, my world felt like it had collapsed around me, and I reached out to my sister Jane for support. I thought she would understand and come to my side, but her reaction was the last thing I expected. Jane refused to come over. She said that she wouldn't feel safe with my wild, rabid dog around. We got into a huge argument. I tried to explain how Max saved my life, but she wouldn't hear it. To her, an animal who had attacked someone had the chance to do it again, regardless of the circumstances. She demanded that I put Max down, and I wasn't about to do that. Max saved my life, but she didn't see that. I couldn't believe my own sister would ask me to do something so cruel. I was sitting on the edge of the couch, clutching my phone when I finally got the courage to call my parents. The events of the past few days had left me feeling more isolated than ever, and I desperately needed their support. When my mom answered, her voice was warm and reassuring. She asked how I was holding up. I told her everything, about my ex breaking in, how Max had protected me, and the argument with Jane. I asked if they could come over because I really needed to talk to both of them. My mom agreed immediately. When they arrived, I could see how worried they were about me. We sat down in the living room and I began to retell them everything. My mom reached out and held my hand and told me how proud she was of me for standing up for Max. She understood that I viewed Max as a part of the family, but my dad looked troubled. He leaned forward and said that while he understood Max had saved me, we had to consider everyone's safety. He suggested that maybe Max could stay with someone else for a while so that Jane felt safe too. I tried to explain that Max was the reason I felt safe on my own. Max was my protector, my lifeline. They refused to get involved in the argument but told me if I needed them that they would be there. The tension in the room was clear, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I told them both that Max wasn't a threat, and that if I lost him, I didn't know how I'd cope. Their divided opinions left me feeling torn, but at least they said they were there for support. In a last-ditch effort to get through to Jane, I asked if she would meet me at a cafe to talk without Max. I was terrified of leaving the house alone, but I was willing to face that fear to try and salvage my relationship with my sister. She was hesitant, but agreed. Meeting Jane at the cafe was one of the hardest things I've ever done. My anxiety was through the roof, but I knew I had to do it. Sitting across from Jane at the small, cozy cafe, I felt my hands start to tremble. Things like this would be scary for everyone, but due to my autism, I truly think my fear was amplified. I took a deep breath and greeted Jane. We had a bit of small talk. After catching up, I opened up to her for the very first time about my relationship with my ex. I told her how he made me feel like trash. I started with telling her how he wasn't who she thought he was. She knew him to be the loving, perfect Prince Charming because I never told her any different. I was so scared of my ex that I thought if I told anyone the truth, he would hurt me. But I gathered up my strength and I went on to tell her everything. How he would criticize me for everything, like how I talked, how I dressed, and even how I moved. He would tell me I was too sensitive and that no one else would ever put up with me because of my quirks. He made me stop hanging out with my friends and made me feel like he was the only one who cared about me. Jane said she had no idea and asked why I didn't tell anyone, but he made sure I felt completely alone. He convinced me that no one would believe me, or worse, that they would side with him. And after a while, I started to believe him. I continued to tell her that there were times when he would get so angry over the smallest things. He'd shout at me, call me names, and he'd even lay hands on me. He always apologized afterward, saying he was just stressed, but it never stopped. It just got worse. She said that she should have known something was up and looked heartbroken from the words she was hearing, but I told her that he was great at hiding it and made sure no one saw that side of him. The night I finally decided to leave was one of the scariest of my life. He'd been drinking, and he was in a rage. I thought he was going to unalive me. I then explained how I got out with the help of a friend. She came over while he was at work, and we packed up my things and I moved out. I changed my number and tried to get as far away as possible. But after he continued to stalk me and threaten me, I got Max to feel safe. That's when I saw the light bulb over Jane's head flicker on. She realized that Max was only there in that moment to protect me. I told her how he fought him off and saved my life. She apologized for not hearing out the full side of the story, but I knew I had to tell her everything in person. This wasn't a conversation we could have over the phone. I noticed a tear fall from her eye, and she repeatedly apologized for being blind and selfish. She begged me to forgive her. We hugged across the table, and for the first time in a while, I felt like I could breathe. Meanwhile, my ex was recovering in the hospital. As soon as he was released, I pressed charges against him. I was still very worried that at some point my ex would push to have Max put down, but fortunately for me, that never happened. The legal process was long and difficult, but I was determined to see it through. It was during this process that I found out the most horrific detail imaginable, one that almost made me relapse into self-inflicted house arrest. It turns out that my ex had parked his car quite a few houses down from mine, but in the car they found rope, gasoline, and matches. I remember the day I found that out. I couldn't sleep. I kept looking at Max, knowing exactly what would have happened had he not been here with me. That night he cuddled up to me and licked my face a lot, and it was through looking at him that I found the strength to continue with this legal process. From that day on, I attended every court hearing. I was determined to make sure he couldn't hurt me or anyone else again. A couple of months later, the day of his sentencing arrived, and I felt a mixture of anxiety and determination as I entered the courtroom. Jane was by my side. Her presence was a comforting anchor in the sea of emotions swirling inside me. We took our seats and I scanned the room, my eyes finally landing on my ex. He was seated at the defendant's table, his appearance a huge difference. He looked really skinny and his face was pale and hollow. His once confident demeanor was replaced with a glum, defeated expression. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his hair, which he always kept carefully styled, was now disheveled and unkempt. His suit hung loosely on his frame, as if he had lost a significant amount of weight since the last time I saw him. As the judge called the court to order, his shoulders slumped and he avoided making eye contact with anyone. The arrogance and swagger that had once defined him were gone. It was replaced by an obvious sense of defeat. I took a deep breath, feeling a surge of empowerment. This was the man who had terrorized me for so long, now reduced to a shadow of his former self. When it was time for me to give my statement, I stood up. My hands were trembling slightly, but I tried my best to keep my voice strong. I began telling my side of the story to the court, and as I gave my testimony, I glanced over at Jake. He kept his head down, staring at the table in front of him. His lawyer occasionally whispered something to him, but he barely responded, his expression vacant. I looked over at Jane, who was sitting in the audience. Her support meant the world to me. I felt stronger than I ever had before. I made sure to include what the police found in his car the night he broke in, and let the jury imagine what he would have done with those 3 things. When I finished, I sat back down, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. As I made my way back to my seat, Jane squeezed my hand. She looked at me as if she were beyond proud of me. The judge nodded, acknowledging my words. As the proceedings continued, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. Seeing my ex in such a state, stripped of his power and bravado, reinforced the fact that I had survived and overcome him. He was no longer the towering figure of fear in my life. He was just a broken man facing the consequences of his actions. Since then, I've grown so much as a person. I've learned to stand up for myself, to trust in my own strength, and to appreciate the incredible bond I have with Max. Jane and I have mended our relationship, and she's become one of my biggest supporters. She even comes over to visit now that she knows that Max wasn't a threat but a loyal protector. As the months passed, I started to regain my confidence. I began therapy to deal with the trauma and truly felt at peace after talking in my sessions. My therapist helped me understand that I was not to blame for what happened, and that I deserved to be happy and safe. With each passing day, I felt a little stronger, a little more capable of facing the world. It felt good knowing that true strength comes from within, and that sometimes, the people who matter most need to be shown the truth before they can truly understand and support you. I'm grateful for Max every day, and I know that no matter what challenges come our way, we'll face them together.